So I'm going to be talking about actually sort of like a very broad and very high level overview of sort of what we do in our group and kind of what motivates us. And so I'm going to start off with this question for you. What does our logo mean, right? Where did our logo come from, right? Of course, we know what the words are. What's that?
Computation. Different area?
Beg your pardon?
Different science area coming together?
Exactly, different science areas coming together, right? And the computation answer over there is this as well, right? So this is now actually a relatively old view of computational science, right? It's only maybe the view that sort of pervaded things sort of 15 years maybe or so ago. In the traditional perspective of computational science as being existing at the intersection of applied math and statistics, computer science, and the science or engineering domain that is interested in computing. Because basically, all of these things have to come together for computation to be an effective tool in whatever question you're trying to answer. Okay. Of course, these days, data is now viewed as on an equal footing to computation, right? I mean, historically, I would have said data is part of computation. You compute on data. You can't do anything with data without computing. So they joined at the hip, right? But now, basically, data has transformed many areas of science. It's changed our ability to ask and answer some questions. So it is important to break it out. And it also emphasizes statistics and sort of the data analytics and also the big data technologies is a very important field in computer science. Okay, so this sort of like that's where I exist, right? I've sort of led a very multidisciplinary career, and certainly growing up for much of that career inside Department of Energy labs, I don't think in my entire career I've written a single disciplinary proposal. It's always been multidisciplinary and collaborative, right? And so coming back to computational chemistry and a bit closer, this amazing individual, Charlene Weatherwatt, she's been this department of, Office of Biological and Environmental Research, which is a very high-level structure in the part of DOE. I remember when I was a young scientist visiting Germantown, the headquarters of DOE in DC, and being walked around meeting with people. And sort of most of these were grey ghosts, right? Sort of administrative types. So I was beginning to get a bit bored. But I walked into her office and she scared me into submission, right? So super bright, super intense, and sort of really reaffirmed for me that our federal funding agencies, NSF, DOE, other ones, right, they really are run by very passionate, well-motivated, excellent scientists with strong vision, right? Certainly there's a share of bureaucrats around, but there's some real gems in this place. And if you ever get a chance to meet Charlene, she's one of them. Anyway, on the way out of her office, right, I noticed on the wall, not this version of the thing, but some other version of it. Save the Planet is the only one with chocolate, right? And so she has a fantastic sense of humor as well as this great science ability. And sort of where I come from, right, I'm down below where Milrevi sits in the scientific sort of computational food chain, right? So I'm down at not quite at the one atom level, but a lot of the questions we're trying to answer about those atoms and molecules really are directed towards sort of the larger goals you'll hear other people in IACS talk about. I mean, the people simulating planet atmospheric dynamics, or say Heather when she's looking at the Antarctic ecology and so on. So very quickly, I'm going to skim through some of these elements in the rest of the talk, right? So what are we trying to do in computational chemistry? Some, very briefly, what we're doing inside MADDNESS, and then close with something that helps motivate things. What can we actually do? So this is a very high level, much higher level than, say, Milrevi or Matt were talking about it, picture of things, right? This is a substance that's very near and dear to my heart, so we have a lot of this in IACS, coffee, right? When you zoom inside coffee, we see lots of stuff, right? There's water as the main bulk ingredient, and our favorite molecule, or at least one of them, is caffeine. Here's its chemical formula. So for those of you who aren't chemists, right, we're showing how the individual types of atoms are connected together in a certain rigid structure, and here's that structure in three-dimensional space. much of chemistry, much of the properties of the material world around us are described entirely by this picture, looking at matter as being structured from molecules and potentially molecules being made out of atoms. But the view of what's controlling that is actually the electronic structure. Atoms are made out of electrons, and so that's where we come in. We take the equations of quantum mechanics, we translate them into code. When I say we, here's a picture of Joel, who's sitting around somewhere. There's lots of this code, and it's got to run on the biggest possible computer. So here's Maddie, a computer science student. So as a large community, we start trying to get this code running fast. And from these calculations, we can get all sorts of things: energies, structures, what happens to your molecule when you shine light on it, and all of that kind of stuff. All this information can get factored into essentially every single step in the scientific discovery process, whether it's hypothesis generation, optimizing for some search target, or characterizing what you've made, right? So it's essentially central to all of this. But a big problem that's often unspoken is there's a massive amount of code, right? Here's about 100 million lines of software, and this is just part of our ecosystem. And yet this stuff has to run on the largest parallel computers that we have. This is from top500.org, which is a website that documents essentially the top 500 fastest computers in the world over a period of time. And Barbara, in her talk earlier, basically mentioned the complexity of these systems is increasing. So we have very complex science that we want to do on very complex computers, and all of this is constantly changing. Our science questions are changing, and the computers themselves are. So I'm going to talk very briefly about MADDNESS. So MADDNESS is written by people. Just want to emphasize that point. So MADDNESS is a general purpose numerical environment. We started off motivated by solving problems in chemistry, but ultimately what we were doing ended up being very broadly applicable. And this is a very key point, right? Our equations can be actually a few thousand lines long sometimes, in the unfortunate cases, but our software is literally millions of lines long. Right? MADDNESS is probably 600,000 lines of code. NWChem, another project I'm working on, is like 5 million. So there's lots of this stuff. Why is this semantic gap there? MADDNESS is part of trying to address that. Behind the scenes in MADDNESS, we have a traditional adapted mesh code that basically, when stuff is getting complicated in space, adaptively refines to give you more accuracy. But we have some math techniques to basically try and make this much more efficient. And so for the mathematicians in the audience, these things make some sense. So here we have the computing, the math, and the science sort of coming together. What we want to do now is apply that to solve some problems. So here's a periodic table which we colored to sort of indicate which of the elements we're in danger of running out, meaning we, the planet, are in danger of running out of in relatively near bits of the future. And the Department of Energy did a survey of those elements, and of the critical elements, many of these fall into a certain chemical category, and they're unfortunately all of the ones that give us the tech that we love in our lives, right? And so buried under this is also a security issue for the country that the major producer of these elements is China now, and the US actually has very limited supply. So what we need to do is maximize the supply of what we've got and also do a better job of recycling, right? You toss your cell phone into the waste, we've got to get all of the good elements out of it somehow, which means we have to separate these elements from each other. But these elements are chemically very similar, right? So we want to design separation agents. And so a standard separations process basically says, you take your cell phone, you dump it in a vat of acid that dissolves everything. So now you've got this aqueous solution with everything in it, and you just want one element out, right? And so what you do is often separate this aqueous mixture with an organic phase, like oil. So oil and water don't mix, so you shake it up so there's an interface between them. And you've got some magic ingredient in here that is favorably going to grab one element over another. And so we want to basically predict the ability to separate some elements favorably over others. And that's the kind of thing that we can actually do fairly well because we're predicting trends, right? As I think Marivi and others indicated, we're bad at predicting absolute numbers. So I'm going to close with just like 3 quick slides. First off, highlighting the Molecular Science Software Institute. So this is a large NSF-funded project at the Virginia Tech. And this is going to be holding, MOSI is going to be holding a workshop here at Stony Brook. It's a summer school for teaching students in parallel computing. It's the second one we've held. The first one we held was in Berkeley, and I think 3 or 4 students from Stony Brook went to that. I'm hoping that since it's here now, we'll get much stronger attendance. So there's the URL, and obviously you know where I am. And actually, here's another opportunity for both faculty and students. So coming up in the not too distant future, May in Tokyo, we have our 3rd joint science meeting with Tokyo Tech, and IACS is looking forward to paying up to about 10 faculty or students to go. Okay? And so if you're interested in going and presenting your work, and an international talk definitely looks good on your CV, just send me an email. Okay. And thank you very much.